This is the Comics Alternative, episode 276. Reviews of Milk Wars, the Motor Girl Omnibus, and Strangers in Paradise 25. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Paul, and we're two academics talking about comics.
That's right. And on this week's show, Paul and I are going to discuss some exciting recent titles. We're going to begin by looking at the 5 issues that make up DC's Milk Wars. After that, we're going to look at Terry Moore's Motor Girl Omnibus, and then follow that up with the first 2 issues of Strangers in Paradise 25. A lot of good stuff to discuss, but before we get to that, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by the good folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are anywhere from 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some incredible specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off of the cover price. Sometimes 50% off cover. But every now and again, you can find discounts that are even more impressive than that.
That's right. Some of the impressive discounts that at DCB service you're going to find include the bundles that they always have every month. This month in April, you're going to find all kinds of DC bundles that include the New Age of DC Heroes and a Valiant bundle. A Vertigo bundle and a DC Young Animal bundle. You're also going to find Marvel bundles with their Legacy and their Fresh Start initiatives. So you're going to find great discounts at up to 50% off of huge bundles of great comics at Discount Comic Book Service.
That's right. Whether you'd like to get your comics bundled or as single issues, you really can't go wrong with the folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Their website is dcbservice.com. Go there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your titles there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that Paul and Derek sent you.
Yeah, please let them know.
Well, Paul, how have you been, my friend?
It's good to be back on the podcast. It's been a minute. I've been working on my dissertation, but it is an honor always to sit in the co-hosting chair and talk comics with you, Derek.
Well, yeah, it definitely is, and I've missed having you on the show. Now, you and I were doing a good number of episodes together a few months ago.
Yeah.
And then you had to step away for your dissertation, and then Gene filled in for a while, and Gene's going to be back on the show.
Yes.
So he's not going anywhere, but it's been a lot of fun talking with him. And Gene, this is for you.
Yes, ka-ching.
Yes, ka-ching. Mr. Katchoo. But we had a really good time over the past, I guess, about 2 months doing the weekly review shows and a couple of interviews here or there. So it was fun working with him. It's definitely fun co-hosting with you, Paul. So I'm glad that you're back. Still working on the dissertation, but it'll get done soon.
Still plugging away. That's right. Still plugging away, but it will be done soon. And really just a shout out to Gene from me. What an absolute pleasure to hear Gene, one of the sort of great deans of comics scholarship, just, muse about comics, muse about the previews catalog and talk with you. And it's been great to have Gene and Gwen, to listen to. But, I'm going to be just a faint shadow of what Gene can do, but I'll do my best here.
Well, we just recently, and I mean within minutes before we started to record, got an email from a listener of the podcast.
Mail time. Mail time.
Ooh, the mail's here. That means we get to see our old friend, Mailbox.
So Paul, our old friend Mailbox, has a message for us. And this is actually an email that's in response to something that Gene and I put out there on the last episode. Now, last week we had our April Previews catalog show, And at one point, we were speculating, who is the previews catalog for? Is it primarily for retailers, as I believed it probably was, or are individual end users the primary people who looked at that? And I had my doubts there because I wanted something a little more than anecdotal evidence, right? It's like, well, I look at it, so therefore, other comics fans do. Sure. And I challenged listeners to chime in with whatever information they had. I didn't really think anyone would respond, but we did get an email. I got it just moments ago, and I'm not sure of this listener's name, but in the email, he goes by the name, or she, who knows, goes by the name Heroic Times. And Heroic Times writes us, wanted to chime in on your question regarding who is using previews the most. While a vehicle for retailers, the exorbitant price of new comics and the rise and success of online retailers such as DCB Service and My Comic Shop highlights that on a monthly basis, a large population of end readers are using previews to determine what is upcoming and to get books affordably. Just doing the math, the number of podcasters and bloggers and their listener readers on top of YouTube and Instagram channels, the number of end users using previews through online retailers dwarfs the number of remaining physical comic shop retailers. Even if we do worst case scenario and extrapolate that only 10% of the 100,000 people who make up the active comic book market in the U.S. are using previews through online retailers or online channels, you're left with 10,000 people, a number that dwarfs the number of remaining physical comic shops. I myself and everyone I know who reads comics gets most of their comics via pre-ordering. You multiply that by yourself and everyone you know who can say the same, and quite quickly you have an answer to your query. My 2 cents.
Yeah, that's insightful. Heroic Times, thank you for, contributing to that discussion. And I think it's an interesting discussion, and I'd love to hear more from other listeners who maybe are retailers, what their perspective is about it. Definitely, it seems to me I was listening to you and Gene talk about this during the previews episode, there are certainly, I'm one of those comic shop denizens who faithfully, enters the shop, picks up the previews catalog, looks ahead and pre-orders for a pull list, or folks do it through DCBS and so on. And yet, there's that sort of reality, that bottom line reality that oftentimes retailers are the ones who are the market, the audience, because they're the ones who have to put in the orders through Diamond and, try to hand sell books. And, so since, comic sales are really kind of sold to comic book shops, who, have to try to sell through all those, all the inventory that they get. Oftentimes, I think, publishers recognize that you have to market. I think Diamond recognized that you have to market to comic book shops to convince them of what's, wanted by readers, by consumers. Although I think certainly, consumers like me who go in the shop every month and pick up previews and say, hey, this looks exciting, are also part of informing that too. So it's just kind of an interesting system. But those numbers are kind of helpful to think about when you think about that. There's, something like in the area of 2,500 comic shops in the US. And so if you compare that to the 10,000 that, Heroic Times has thrown out there as a possible number of the audience, it is interesting to compare.
Yeah, it is. And I appreciate this way of approaching that query that we had last week. Now, I'm not entirely convinced of the numbers here because, as Heroic Times says, 10%, let's say, of 100,000, 10,000 people, kind of dwarfs the number of comic shops. Not really a viable argument for this reason. One end reader or end user is going to read one comic. One retailer is going to reach and sell how many copies? So basically, even if you have something like, let's say, 2,000 comic shops, if those 10,000 comic shops sell comics to, let's say, 20 people each week who have no idea or have never really looked at or don't on a regular basis the previews catalog, many, many more people are reached through those means. So there's that also, and I understand what you were saying, Paul, in terms of looking through previews and putting certain titles on your pull list. There are some retailers, though, and I'm sure brick and mortar, I know for a fact online, that you can create pull lists without looking one iota at a preview's catalog. Now, this is not that way with DCB Service, our sponsor, because they really don't have a pull list. But I used to, several years ago, order through Lone Star Comics or mycomicshop.com, as it's now known. And when you first order something, that title is automatically, if you set it up this way, and they may have changed the system since I last ordered through them, it automatically puts a comic on a pull list, and then every month you can approve getting that next issue of something that you had ordered last month. And so it creates a kind of de facto pull list, which I appreciate. And whenever I ordered through mycomicshop.com, never looked at previews. Or I rarely did, let's say. So there's some shops, depending on their setup, who do things in such a way that you don't even really need to look at previews. They do that work for you. Which gets back to the initial question, is the previews catalog geared more toward end readers or retailers? And I don't think it's an either or. I think it's both. True. Although, as I said on the last episode, I'm a little suspicious of the idea that it's primarily for end users.
Yeah. No, that's a good point, because exactly because of the large role that you pointed out that the, comic shops have in distribution, which requires decisions, decision making on all the comic shop owners and managers that I know, and all the hard work that they do trying to get a pulse of what their readers want. And so yeah, it is. I think it is trying to address all audiences, and that's part of why the previews catalog seems sometimes, feels discombobulated or whatever. It's trying to serve multiple purposes, and you can see that. But I do want to mention that, full disclosure, our sponsor, Discount Comic Book Service, they don't have the sort of automatic pull list, but you can set up a pull list where it will populate your cart with all the things that you want to regularly, have, which is a good service that DCB Service does, part of their awesome service. But it's also something that I took advantage of to make sure I was kind of keeping track regularly. And I think the one thing that I know for certain is that this is an industry that's very hard to get a objective overview picture of. And so, I read columns like Brian Hibbs's columns in The Beat, Tilting at Windmills, which talks a lot about industry and the perspective of a retail shop owner. But I know that, again, is only one slice of a huge overall picture. So the only thing that I'm certain of in this is my own ignorance. And so glad to have listeners chime in and lend their insight and knowledge to this.
Yeah. And, I didn't even think about this until just now, but, we're talking primarily about comics readers who, may be described as Wednesday warriors, right? People who on a regular basis go into the shop. I mean, what about the large audience of comics readers who really don't go into comic shops, but their reading fare are what you would call more like graphic novels, or maybe they go to Barnes and Nobles and get trade collections. Nowhere near a comic shop, nowhere near a previews catalog. I mean, that's a large part of the market that I think is, if not ignored or overlooked by people in the media who deal with comics, like podcasters, comics podcasters. They don't think of enough.
Right.
So, for instance, on many comics-related podcasts that I listen to, it's a rarity, outside of maybe on yours and Gwen's Young Reader show, that I hear the name Telgemeier.
That's right. Yeah.
One of the absolute, hands down, biggest selling creators in comics today.
That's right. That's really the biggest, biggest selling. And I just mentioned Tilting at Windmills, Brian Hibbs's column, and he had a recent column where he talks about having gone, he goes over diamond numbers, so sort of month after month, and he tracks his own sales from the store, Comics Experience in San Francisco, out here in the West. But he's been talking about the book scan numbers that have just started to be released, where we can start to get some indication, and it's in Nielsen's ratings. It's imperfect, but some indication of what's going on in the bookstores. And you're absolutely right. Like the first DC or Marvel title doesn't appear till like in the late teens, and it's really the top is populated by Raina Telgemeier and Dave Pilkey of Dogman. I don't know if anybody.
I know you've talked about it before.
I do know Dogman because I have a 7-year-old kid in my house. But apart from that, people don't realize that the market is bigger than just the local comic shop. So that's a reality too. Absolutely.
See, all of this great topic speculation, discussion that generated from Heroic Times' email to us. So thank you very much, Heroic Times.
Thank you, Mailbag. Thank you, Heroic Times.
Paul, you want to get into this week's titles?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay, so we're going to begin with something that may, on the surface at least, seem a little unlikely for what we do on the Comics Alternative. We're going to focus on DC titles and not Vertigo.
That's right.
Mind you, because we talk about Vertigo a lot. Yep. Maybe not lately, but, throughout our history, primarily, we've talked about Vertigo when it comes to DC titles. We're not going to talk about Vertigo titles. We're going to be looking at the 5 issues that in total make up the Milk Wars series. And that includes the JLA Doom Patrol Special, the Mother Panic, Batman Special, Shade the Changing Girl, Wonder Woman Special, Cave Carson Has a Cybernetic Eye, Swamp Thing Special, and then finally and most recently, the Doom Patrol JLA Special.
That's right. And these came out, what month was it? In quick succession, week after week, just a couple months back, but they're due to be collected in a collection. So if folks haven't picked up the individual issues to check out this crossover, soon enough, DC will have a collection, and I'm sure it'll be there at Discount Comic Book Service that folks can pre-order. Check out.
Yeah, that's right. And, they're by different creators. So, for instance, JLA Doom Patrol crossover, Steve Orlando, Gerard Way, and is it ACO?
Yeah.
The illustrator, is that a collective?
Yeah, I don't know. I believe it's an individual, but I don't know if it's ACO or ACO as an acronym. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. And then Mother Panic, Batman, Jody Houser and Ty Templeton, Shade and Wonder Woman, Cecil Castellucci and Mirka Aldolfo, Cave Carson, Swamp Thing, John Rivera, and Langdon Foss. And then Doom Patrol JLA, the aforementioned Orlando Way, and then with art by Eaglesham, Dale Eaglesham.
As well as Nick Darrington, who does a number of pages. Yeah.
Now, I didn't include in that lineup the team who does Eternity Girl because I don't know if we want to talk much about that. I mean, I guess we can.
Yeah.
But I don't know if we have to for this reason. I recently did an interview with Mags and Sonny about Eternity Girl. And for those who may not know, Eternity Girl got her, I guess you could say her introduction, or at least the most recent incarnation, in the Milk Wars issues. And then, what was it, 2 weeks ago now, as the first issue proper of the Eternity Girl within the Young Animal line.
That's right. Yeah, folks are curious about Eternity Girl, which the debut issue was magnificent. I loved it, actually. I definitely recommend that you go check out the interview that Derek did with Magdalene Visaggio and Sonny Liu, kind of diving in some depth about the book. And yeah, you're right. There's sort of 2 pages in each of these Milk Wars issues that is the sort of, prequel to the Eternity Girl series that's essential. It's not essential to appreciate Eternity Girl #1, but it sure helps. And those were really fun. Those got me really excited, kind of whet my appetite for Eternity Girl. Yeah.
So, although in that last issue, the 5th one of the Milk Wars, we do have Eternity Girl, but she's kind of like wedged in, even literally, between panels at one point. So we don't have those 2 pages that follow the very end of that Milk War issue proper.
Oh, you're right. I forgot about that.
But you do find Eternity Girl across all 5 of those issues.
Yeah.
But we can just focus specifically on, I guess, the Milk Wars crossover proper.
Yeah.
So yeah, we are talking about Justice League, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Swamp Thing on the Comics Alternative, but we're doing so within the context of Young Animal, and that's definitely more in our wheelhouse.
Yeah, for people who are wondering if this is really the provenance of comics alternative, I know that, Young Animal wound up in your top 10 last year, Derek, in the, your favorites of 2017. I think you had grouped them all as a bunch in there. And I do think that this is the kind of, and this is, flat out superhero comics, but I think there's a kind of meta commentary about superhero comics that's going on here that really makes it, worth our interest, worth our study. So I feel like this is squarely in the comics alternative field of play. I don't know if everybody would agree, but if you don't like us talking about superheroes, then just indulge us for a little bit. I think there's some interesting stuff going on here.
Right. Now, we've said that on the comics alternative, we really won't discuss mainstream DC and Marvel superhero universes. Other publishers who have what you would call superhero titles, yeah, fair game. But we're also very much up for curious takes, metafictional or otherwise, on the superhero genre as a whole. And that definitely is what Milk Wars is about, as you point out.
Yep.
Now, I recommended that we look at the Milk Wars issues. Actually, it was an idea I got from you. I was listening to your podcast, The Comic Syllabus, and at one point a few episodes back, you mentioned something about the Milk Wars. And I thought, that would be good to talk about once it completes on the Comics Alternative. And so I asked you if you wanted to do that, and you jumped at the chance.
Yeah, I think it's been a lot of fun, and like you, I've been a fan of the Young Animal sort of enclosed universe, and I think you've mentioned this or alluded to this before. I was a little bit dismayed at the thought that this crossover would sort of try to wrangle them into the main DC universe. Again, like you, not because I have any objection to superheroes. I actually do read regularly, keep up with the DC universe and so forth. But I just thought that it was nice that it was this sort of special, curated, separate thing. But I think if you were going to cross them over, and if you were going to, while doing that, comment on the whole prospect of the crossover and what what it involves and what it does in these sort of superhero narrative worlds, you just couldn't do it better than this. And so as I was reading it, I just sort of recognized, hey, something really interesting is going on here. And so I'm kind of glad that if we are talking about superhero stuff, that this is the kind of material that we're talking about.
Right. Yeah, when I first heard about this crossover, I was suspicious. Now, technically, the Young Animal world, the worlds, I guess, that make up Young Animal does take place within the DC universe. But,
right.
So unlike Vertigo, it was still a part of DC territory. On the other hand, as you put it, it was kind of a fenced off space.
Right.
And so you wouldn't see Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman at all. And so when I saw that they were going to do this, I thought, oh, God, why? Why do you have to force? Because DC does this, Marvel definitely does it, where everything has to be a part of their particular universe. And I always have found that irritating. I mean, for instance, with the New 52, when they brought back Sergeant Rock within the DC universe, stop it. I mean, honestly, Sergeant Rock was one of my favorite titles growing up.
Right.
And the New 52 ruined it for me, I had to say. But and not because they were trying to bring Sergeant Rock firmly within the DC universe. It's just I don't know. It seemed a little too forced.
Right.
That's one of the reasons why of the initial Young Animal titles, the one that I liked the least was Mother Panic. Because it was overtly part of the Batman world, whereas Doom Patrol, Shade, and Cave Carson were more or less their own things.
Yeah, I think so. I think the reason why it's made sense to me, and this starts to get into a little bit of what the books are trying to do, is that, in sort of existing in the DC universe, but not, they became a kind of oblique commentary on the whole idea of superheroes. And I feel like this crossover is kind of a fulfillment of that, like a culmination of that. And so that to me is an interesting way to do superheroes, to exist in the universe. I kind of think it's fun and a sign of how sort of emboldened DC has been in the last couple of years because of the success of Rebirth and so on, that they sort of let this happen. And it seems to be like, let this happen in the main universe. It's not sort of cordoned off into a alternate reality. And so I feel like there's some experimentation and therefore some, you were saying, like metatextual elements to it that, make me feel satisfied that they did this. I'm glad that Young Animal did this. I think it was very kind of upfront in, from the cover optics of this, takeoff of the All-Star Superman cover by Frank Quitely. That's really in the cover of the very first one of these crossovers. It really kind of boldly comes out and says, yes, we are doing something kind of fun and interesting and maybe thought provoking about this whole prospect of being in a superhero universe. So
right. And the big shadowy corporation that is in the background of everything that's going on across these 5 issues is a company called Retcon.
Right.
Which should tell you by its name what's going on here in the Milk Wars crossover.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what they're attempting to do is on Earth Prime manipulate things through something as wholesome as milk to where it becomes homogenized.
Yes.
In order to be more easily consumable. And so, like you, I appreciated what Orlando and Way were doing in this. They're making a comment on not just what DC, but what comics may tend to do, especially large publishers within the comics industry has done in terms of their properties. And so that I appreciated. But on the other hand, as I was reading through this, I couldn't help but think, haven't we seen this before in several different guises? Many of them created by, Grant Morrison.
Sure. Right.
Speaking of Doom Patrol.
Right.
Yeah. Not that because this was done before, it can't be done again.
Yeah.
But I couldn't help but think as I read through this of my experiences with Grant Morrison, his handling of obviously Animal Man, Doom Patrol, and other DC properties especially.
Sure.
But then I was thinking, but a lot of people may not be familiar with Grant Morrison and his past with DC, or if they are, it's maybe more recent past, right? Like his work with Action Comics.
Sure. Yeah, that's possible. And there is a lot of Grant Morrison nods, a lot of tipping the hat to that. What you just said makes me think that just as a lot of superhero tropes have become old hat, at this point, even superhero deconstruction tropes are kind of old hat, like we've seen this before. And I think that's true to some extent. It's true. I guess a couple of things about Milk Wars is that it does it in a really compact way. And to me, it maintains the vibe and the weirdness that, Young Animal, I think admittedly brought back, like it was trying to bring something back. And maybe with a bit of a remix of some contemporary sensibilities, but you're right. It's doing something that's not brand new. And yet I kind of am still somewhat surprised when it comes off the way that it did. And so to me, it felt successful. Although I will say, and we can talk a little bit about this too, one of the things about crossovers that I think about, and this is inspired by like, just reading a lot of, people who think about superhero universes and crossovers and what it's trying to do as a sort of cultural space is that, crossovers are, there's this paradox, right? Where you're taking these very familiar and often like deeply established worlds with, Justice League has got its own backstory. And if you haven't been keeping up with the fact that Vixen and Killer Frost are on the Justice League of America, then what the heck is going on? But, if you know that stuff, it's all touchstones for you. You're like, yes, I know this stuff. And the same is true of the other, the Young Animal world. And so when you bring them together, you sort of displace both of them from their native home and you sort of, mash them together. It's kind of like what it's like to be, an immigrant community or a few immigrant communities smashed together. And I think that disorienting feeling is like, I think the paradox is that it's comforting to people who know it, but then it can be actually uncomfortable to people who know that stuff well, because they're disoriented by being thrown and clashed with another world. And so it's sort of like, on one hand, crossovers are supposed to make us all really excited. On the other hand, sometimes crossovers don't please anybody, because, you're looking for a sense of the familiar, and everything got unfamiliar because you smashed everything together. So I think some of that is going on, and maybe some commentary about that fact is going on here as well.
I'm glad you raised this issue, and I really do like your analogy of the immigrant community. I think it works really well. Now, I was one of those readers of Milk Wars who was not aware of the fact that Frost and Vixen were part of the Justice League, because it's been a long time since I've read Justice League titles. Sure. But that didn't throw me off about Milk Wars. I will tell you what did throw me off, but I just assumed, maybe not like Marvel's Avengers, which seems to have an extreme rotating cast.
Right. Ever-changing roster, right?
Yeah, we don't have a roster that changes that frequently with Justice League, but I do know that it changes. So it didn't surprise me that there were some unfamiliar faces, so to speak, on the Justice League and the Milk Wars. Okay, I could take that. Where I seemed to be thrown was in my not having kept up with the various young animal titles. And so this is one of the reasons why I wanted to discuss Milk Wars with you on this show, is because I was pretty sure you were much more well-read in the young animal titles than I was. I started off keeping up with them, especially Doom Patrol and Shade the Changing Girl. But then because of other readings that I would have to do for the podcast and otherwise, I kind of let some of those drop. So like with the Doom Patrol and Shade the Changing Girl, I read the first volumes.
Right.
With Mother Panic, I think it was just the first 2 issues. I let it drop. Same thing with Cape Carson. My letting those titles go had nothing to do with the quality of the stories. I just didn't have the time.
Yeah.
So coming back to these young animal titles through Milk Wars, these crossovers, I picked up that first issue, the JLA Doom Patrol special, and I felt at a loss. I thought, there are things going on here within Young Animals, not so much the DC universe, that I was ill-equipped to kind of wrap my brain around. Now, you having kept up with young animal titles much better than I have lately, what was your experience with the Milk Wars? Did you feel like you could comfortably slip into the narrative?
That's a great question. And I guess my answer to that, and maybe some, listeners who have also been doing the same thing that I've been doing, trying to keep up, will feel the same way. Every time I read a new issue of Doom Patrol, by virtue of its own weirdness, I had no idea what was going on. And then I would go back and read previous issues, and I still had no idea what was going on. And so, but I loved it. I kind of loved that experience, because I feel like that's part of, since Morrison on Doom Patrol, that's part of the effect, right? Like, that's what they're trying to pull off, is this certain weirdness that estranges you from your expectations. And so I'll admit, like, I like this crossover. I probably fell asleep the first 3 times I tried to read issue 1 because I'm reading it late at night, and because you have to be so kind of like attuned to what they're trying to do. And usually these kind of multiversal shenanigans is what makes me check out when I'm reading superhero comics, like I liked Grant Morrison's Multiversity, but every time I see that map of the orrery of worlds or whatever, there's a mental fog that sits over me. And I don't know if others can relate to that, but it's just the stuff that feels to me like kind of gatekeepery, like, oh, if you aren't in the know, then all this is utterly confusing. And there's like, there's you're ignorant and somebody else knows what the heck is going on. But I think, what I think the sort of central premise of the whole thing, which we sort of haven't said, but in the first issue, essentially this corporation, as you mentioned, Retcon, which was actually introduced in Doom Patrol, in kind of the latter issues of the Doom Patrol run before this. This Retcon corporation wants to kind of reestablish reality. There's a quote from the sort of sniveling looking marketing person who says, in light of recent events, we've moved our business model away from broadcast to reality estate, which is a play there. We've specially conditioned this world. You'll find its appeal broad and unassailable. And so what this corporation retcon is trying to do under the leadership of Lord Manga Khan, which is kind of another obscure DC villain, is to remake the world in a way that, with all that's going on right now in the news about, the Sinclair news group sort of handing out to local news affiliates a mandated set of comments, that's straight out of like Trump talking points about fake news and what a danger to democracy. It just sort of like hits very close to home that, these corporate overlords are trying to remake reality in a certain image. And so they're trying to make this milkman world, and it's taken over the main DC heroes, and trying to the young animal folks are trying to shake them out of it. That's kind of the setup for all of these issues. But I think that overall is sort of, it's kind of a interesting continuity with what Young Animal has been doing, but it's also so weird that to come back to your question, I was very disoriented initially, and it really took until the Batman Mother Panic issue before I really kind of caught my bearings and figured out what exactly was going on. And from then on, I think it was more of a delight. But until then, I was struggling to to keep up with what was going on, for sure.
Yeah. It's interesting in that among the 5 issues that make up Milk Wars, for me at least, ironically, the one that I had the easiest time comprehending and feeling, I guess, as a reader more comfortable and assured that I'm understanding the narrative was the Mother Panic Batman special.
Right.
I'm not going to say it's the one that I liked the most, but it's the one that I had the least difficulty getting into that narrative world. I enjoyed that first issue, JLA Doom Patrol Special. I felt a little confused at first. Well, in the middle and in the end. But, again, it's the Doom Patrol, right?
Sure.
But I loved what Orlando and Way were doing in terms of this commentary on the homogenization of culture through comics. And I especially loved Milkman Man.
Right. Right. Which is their Superman send up.
That's right. Things got a little freakier with that final issue, the Doom Patrol JLA special. I like how they brought Elastigirl or Elastic Woman into this world as well. I thought that was a nice tie-up, it being a Doom Patrol title. Shade the Changing Girl, Wonder Woman. I saw what they were attempting to do. Of the 5, that's the one that worked the least for me. And I mean, I pretty much understood where the character Shade was coming from. And so I'm wondering if those who may have left Shade the Changing Girl after the first issue, or maybe didn't even pick up any issue of Shade the Changing Girl, how confused they may have been with that issue.
Right.
I mean, I saw what Castellucci was attempting to do with making, what was the Wonder Woman called? Wonder Wife?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
The homogenized version of Wonder Woman. I appreciated that, but I don't know. I felt mixed about that one, which is strange because Shade the Changing Girl is one of my favorite Young Animal characters so far.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I liked that one a lot. I realized that part of the appeal of it to me, not that issue specifically, the whole crossover, is that I realized that there was kind of a mounting narrative and a specific reason and way that the things were being ordered. And so I latched onto that pretty quickly, which is that Milkman Man is sort of the main featured milkified character, right? In the first one. And so we have the Frank Whiteley Superman sort of style. But of course he's a milkman who delivers milk that, kind of intoxicates everybody to this, homogeneity that, you've been talking about that, retcon is trying to do. So you kind of have the Superman analog in the first one. You have the Batman analog in the second one, which I agree with you. In the Mother Panic Batman one, not my favorite, but it was the simplest and clearest, which I kind of needed to ground me in what was going on, And so I thought that the sort of Batman as Father Bruce, this sort of religious proselytizing priest of, milkhood or whatever, milkianity was really funny. It's the only time Mother Panic's made me laugh. But then it made sense to me then that you're trying to get the Holy Trinity of DC heroes. And so you do Wonder Woman as a sort of send up. And I think, Castellucci really sharp in this of sort of women in comics. And, I think they're lampooning this kind of oversimplified women in comics, with this very extreme, like Wonder Wife has these, we're talking about milk. So the sort of mammary function, which gets attached to Wonder Wife here. Mm-hmm. And then there's a whole bunch of versions of Shade who are kind of this entourage of the emotional spectrum, that is kind of, it reminds me of the movie Inside Out, but sort of adultified. And so I thought that there was a great commentary there about just Wonder Woman and women characters in these superhero worlds. I had to say, though, my favorite was that, okay, so you hit in those first three, the Holy Trinity. I love that they went to Swamp Thing next, and sort of turned the story upside down, because the Cave Carson has the Cybernetic Eye Swamp Thing episodes issue. In all the previous ones, you basically had the Justice League heroes caught up in this milk brainwashing and needed to be sort of broken free by the young animal folks. And then to go to Swamp Thing next is to kind of take a nod to, your Alan Moores and, I forget, did Neil Gaiman write Swamp Thing? He did, right, for a time. And sort of that whole British invasion, as well as all the other people who've written Swamp Thing. Like, I think Swamp Thing is symbolic of people within superhero comics sort of weirding up superhero comics the way that Young Animal has been weirding them up. And so rather than Cave trying to free Swamp Thing, it's sort of a reverse, like Swamp Thing helps Cave to unlock from the illusions. And I thought that was a fun kind of turn. So that might have been my favorite issue, the Cave Carson Swamp Thing, which was a surprise to me, because the Langdon Foss art on that was not, I think, it was interesting. It's just such a contrast from the art that I expected from Cave Carson, because Michael Avon Oeming is usually the artist there. So I don't know. Did you have associations when you got to Cave Carson and Swamp Thing that issue called up for you?
Well, I think one of the things that struck me is something that you just mentioned, and that is Foss's art. And it's nothing against Foss's art, as you said. It's just, it wasn't what I expecting. It wasn't, I guess, my favorite representation visually of Swamp Thing. Outside of that, though, I mean, it's fine. Now, it did make sense to me to pair Swamp Thing and Cave Carson, because Cave Carson is a subterranean figure, right?
Right, yeah.
Like Swamp Thing in many ways. I mean, this is someone who has been known to delve into the subterranean world for different reasons, maybe from Cave Carson. He has the ability to do that. And so those two just strike me as a nice pairing. I also like what you said about perhaps, let's say, a tip at the pen at like the British Invasion, Alan Moore and others who have come to the DC universe, Swamp Thing, and also other properties like Doom Patrol, and to make of it something different than it was before, which is what Milk Wars in many ways is addressing.
Yeah. I thought that was a fun little turn. And yeah, it's a weird rendition of Swamp Thing. Langdon Foss is definitely not, Bernie writes or whatever. But I think there's this kind of like indie underground style to his art. That's kind of a fun alternative, a little twist on the expected Swamp Thing, and even the expected Cave Carson, insofar as we have expectations about Cave. So, yeah. So I mean, I guess all that to say, I think that the they're sort of like playing with the milquetoast way that superhero, comics can sort of blandly try to homogenize things, as well as
was that a phonetic pun?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's actually in the Cast in the Shade and Wonder Woman. I think mentioned something about a milquetoast construct or something like that.
Oh, I missed the word milquetoast.
Yeah, it seems apropos. It's funny because it's like in this sort of milkified world, they're both really bland and also extremely violent, which is actually a great way to describe a lot of superhero comics. So just part of the discussion there.
Well, let me ask you if there's something else that I missed. Where's Bug?
Oh yeah, that's a great point. That's
was Bug there somewhere that I completely missed out on?
No, but I never got to the end of the Bug miniseries, so I don't know what happened at the end of that. I do think that, the part of the purpose of the crossover and the last issue especially was to remake the Young Animal world.
Right.
And so it's interesting that Bug didn't get picked up. It does seem like part of that remaking is the inclusion, like you pointed out, of Eternity Girl, but I don't know what that means for the fate of Bug.
Yeah, and like you, I'm not aware of how the Bug series of the All Reds turned out. But regardless, this is a Young Animal world, and anything can happen.
That's true.
So whether or not a character is coming back or not in any way or any form, it could still be a part of the narrative. But you're right that part of the purpose of Milk Wars is to not only mix the regular DC universe with Young Animal, but to do so in a way that will propel the next stage of Young Animal titles. Yeah.
I think that's definitely there. And I got to say too, we've been talking about this sort of bland superhero world, but I do think that part of, especially like the fact that Steve Orlando is as involved as he is, part of the comment here is also that, that is a bit of a straw man picture of what superhero stuff is like. As you often say on this podcast, it's not that we don't respect the superhero work. We just, it's just overcovered. And that's definitely true. But I think that there's at least a few nods in here to, there's some stuff about that superhero stuff that's ridiculous and frankly dumb, but it's just a lot more sophisticated, I think, and there's a lot more going on there than we often give it credit for when we're outsiders. And actually, part of what's dumb about the stuff is you almost have to be an insider to understand what all these crises of infinite whatevers are,
Yeah.
But there is something, I think, philosophical going on in that kind of work, and Grant Morrison has been a big person in unlocking that for people, but I feel like as much as there's a kind of a ridiculing of superhero stuff, there's also some acknowledgement, some tips of the hat to the interesting things that do go on there.
Oh yeah, and yes, there are those more heady superhero writers like Grant Morrison, Alan Moore, and others. But even, I guess, the less heady ones, you can still do some really serious things within the superhero genre. And I've always thought that, and I have always had a problem with people dismissing superhero comics as a whole out of hand. Yeah. And there are occasions where things get really ridiculous and tiring and overused, but show me a medium that doesn't have tiresome, overused cliches, all of that.
That's right.
So, comics, superhero genre in particular is, just like every other medium out there. They're going to be, parts of it that's brilliant and other manifestations, maybe the majority, that leaves you a little cold. So, and I'm glad that you pointed out on the Comics Alternative where we don't diss superhero comics. It's just other people cover that. Let them do that. We do our own thing. We pay attention to things that don't get near as much attention as they should, like Terry Moore, which we will begin discussing momentarily. But I don't know if I enjoyed the Milk Wars crossover as much as you did, but I think my primary reason for being a little reserved on my recommendation is just I felt out of touch with the latest Young Animal stories. But then you were telling me that when it came to the Doom Patrol world, it's confusing regardless.
Right. So. Yeah. It's part of the ride. But no, I do appreciate that this crossover has occasioned a bit of a crossover for us in terms of, dipping our toes in that superhero business. And that's probably as much of a toe dip as we need here. Mm-hmm. Right. So I'm excited to talk about Terry more, but this was fun.
Well, we should probably use the word crossover as a subtitle for this episode of the Comics Alternative, because what we're going to discuss next, or at least eventually, is crossover within the worlds that Terry Moore has created. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's interesting in that I didn't have that in mind when you and I were first discussing what we would talk about on this episode. Milk Wars and then the Terry Moore titles. And I think it wasn't until I read the second issue of Strangers in Paradise that things really clicked. It's like, oh my God, it was a an opportune choice to use Milk Wars along with these two Terry Moore titles. And we're going to talk about the new Strangers in Paradise 25, the first two issues. But I think first I want us to get to Motor Girl Omnibus.
Yes.
Now, you and I were talking about on our Best of 2017 show, I think Motor Girl was one of your favorites of the year. I didn't list it, and I'm a big Terry Moore fan, and I think I told you on that episode, the reason I didn't list it is I had gotten halfway through Motor Girl and then didn't finish it. And then after a while just decided I'll wait for the Omnibus to come out. And the Omnibus was released late last month, the very end of March.
Right.
Now, Motor Girl was originally a 10-issue series that ran, I think, from November of 2016 to November of last year.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
But for all practical purposes, what we're discussing is a new release, this Omnibus. Right. Mm-hmm. And did you get the limited edition Omnibus?
No, I didn't. I wish I had, because Terry Moore on his website, had I think it was 1,000, right? Mm-hmm. Of the faithful, the Terry Moore faithful, and a special omnibus, and I didn't jump on that opportunity, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I guess your cover is a little different from mine, because I did jump on it when I saw that he was offering that limited edition.
Actually, I'm curious. I want to ask if there's stuff that's in the omnibus, because the reason I didn't buy it is because I actually got all the single issues of Motor Girl and the trade of the first half of it, entitled Real Life. It was released in 2 trades as well. And so I don't even actually have the omnibus on hand. Are there things in there that I'm missing out on, lacking, special features or something?
Well, there's a sketch gallery, but I don't know if the sketch gallery had appeared in the trades.
Okay.
Because I didn't get the trades.
Yeah.
So it may not be that different. Now, there is a signed plate that comes in the Omnibus edition. Now, I think that, or the limited Omnibus, the cover of the limited Omnibus is an extreme close-up of Mike the gorilla's face.
Right.
But I think the regular Omnibus on the cover is Mike and together.
Gotcha. Yeah. Gotcha. And that's a good segue for us to sort of describe what this book is, which is it's about Sam, who's an ex-Marine who served in Iraq. And at the beginning, she's sort of managing a scrapyard, Libby's scrapyard, which is actually the first little touch of a crossover within the Terry Moore universe, because Libby, I think, is a small background character from Strangers in Paradise. And, but, when we meet Sam, she lives with, as you mentioned, Mike, a gorilla, which at the outset seems, like they have a fun chemistry, but it seems like maybe Mike only appears to Sam, or only Sam can see and talk to Mike, this, walking, talking gorilla who, hands her the wrench when she needs it. So it's a kind of an interesting premise. It's interesting setup. But from there, the story, sort of unfolds to, some people who are trying to buy up the scrapyard from Libby, and Sam trying to hold on to that. And we find out a little bit more about Sam's past. And then there's, UFOs that show up as well. So it's kind of an interesting mixture of things.
Yeah, I remember when I saw Motor Girl solicited initially, I thought that this was a strange title for Terry Moore because you have the whole UFO little green men thing going on, and then you have this gorilla that apparently is functioning within the human world.
Right.
Now, with this first issue, though, you do find out really quickly that, at least with Mike, this is something that only Sam can see.
Yeah.
And there's something wrong with her physiologically. In other words, because of what she experienced and what she suffered over in Iraq, especially as a POW, there's something not right with her. She's got some kind of brain trauma of some sort. And as the story unfolds, we get more information about that.
Yeah.
But, one of the reasons why I wanted us to discuss this omnibus is not only because I love Terry Moore and this is a great limited series, but I felt a little guilty that on the Comics Alternative, we hadn't discussed Motor Girl at all outside of that best of last year's show that you and I did.
Sure.
And, when Kunka and I were doing the Comics Alternative together, he wasn't the biggest fan of Terry Moore. And so that's one of the reasons why there's some Terry Moore titles I didn't suggest that we discuss together on the show, because he probably wouldn't want to do it. So that's why we didn't discuss Motor Girl.
Yeah.
But I absolutely love the title. I just didn't get through the entire run when those issues initially came out. So I'm glad we're taking the opportunity to do that now.
Me too.
Now you mentioned the characters Sam, Mike, and then Libby. Two of my favorite characters of this story are Vic and Larry. And when we first see them, and I can't remember, is it the first issue or the second issue?
I think so.
Yeah, they're hired help.
Right.
Seem to be quote unquote thugs.
Right.
For
quote unquote, right.
Yeah, for a Mr. Walden. But they're bumbling and not very effective. As the series continues, we get to see more and more of their ineffectiveness, which makes them much more endearing characters.
Right.
And then by the end of things, without giving anything away, they become more heroic in what they do. And even if they didn't do certain things to kind of make up for our initial impressions of them, I mean, the fact that they're so bumbling and so funny in their bumblingness make them great characters, especially Larry.
Yeah. Larry's funny. I hope we see Larry again.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of reminds me, I think that one of the things that jumps out to me about Motor Girl, and it's signaled right away from the cover, the fact of Sam and Mike, a woman and a gorilla standing next to each other, is that there's an interesting thing that's going on here with different genres and tones. And, I don't know if this is the reason why Kunka was not into, Motor Girl, but I do know that some people who aren't, into Terry Moore, but I know that some people who, dip into Terry Moore and try out his work can find it a little disorienting because it's confusing. I remember I started reading Strangers in Paradise and I read it in kind of a haphazard way, just picking up volumes of the trades in the library and realizing that there was a bigger story that all of these were part of as I read this and that volume, and never really being able to piece together the bigger story, but really being confused. Like, was this romance? Was this slice of life? Was this crime? Was this poetry? What exactly was going on here? And I think Terry Moore's work, the long running Strangers in Paradise, and then after that, the sort of shorter, and more, I think, focused, series Echo and Rachel Rising, it's easy to take it for granted. I think it becomes very easy, even if you're a fan, to sort of go, oh, okay, I know that he's up to something bigger, so I'm just going to let the issues stockpile. And so what I think, I was kind of surprised by how quickly Motor Girl ended, at just being a 10 issue compared to, say, Rachel Rising, which was, I think, in the 40s. But I think Moore is probably at his most compact. Like, this is the tightest Terry Moore work. In fact, now I think if somebody was, if I was trying to convince somebody to try out his work, this is the first thing I'd hand them, actually, because I just think it's tight. Yeah, it seems like as every series kind of is getting shorter and shorter and shorter, maybe he's doing a little bit less more of sort of like active experimentation and just knows from the outset what he's trying to accomplish. And so kind of does it in this very efficient 10 issues.
Right. Well, I can tell you one big reason why Andy wasn't a big fan of Terry Moore, because he felt that he ruined the Runaways. And so I think he held that against him. But
I forgot about that.
Yeah. But, you know, what you were saying about Terry Moore and how to place him, I think some of that came out, for me at least, in going through this Motor Girl Omnibus. And it's something that I really appreciate about Terry Moore. Not so much that he's kind of amorphous in some ways when it comes to genre, and that's fine with me. But sometimes the art strikes me as, I don't want to say confusing, but incongruous, but in a really fun way. What I mean by that is there's something, okay, first and foremost, Terry Moore is an outstanding artist, especially when it comes to anatomy.
Yes, I love it.
Now, he draws men very well, but I think that he has a love, and I don't mean this in a sexual sense, when it comes to women, especially women's anatomy and the way he represents them, and not even this kind of idealized Barbie-esque figure. I mean, the female anatomy in its variety of forms and variations. And I think he is a master of, I guess in a larger sense, illustrating more realistically human characters. On the other hand, there's a side of his art that is very cartoony and fun. And I love the juxtaposition of the more realistic art and the cartoony stuff. And we get that in various ways in Motor Girl.
Yes.
Two examples. One is with the little green men, the UFO creatures, right? At various times by Larry, especially called E.T.
Right.
I mean, they do look very cartoony. Another example of the more realistic set aside the more cartoony, when we first see Walden, I believe, and he's on the phone with Vic, we see that he's overlooking a project that involves a rocket. And I remember the first time I saw that, I think it's in the first issue, I said, you know, that's like a rocket that you would find in an old Warner Brothers cartoon, because it does look very cartoony. The fins on the side, it's sitting up on those fins, and they're very pointed. Again, it looks like the kind of rocket you would see in cartoons or that a kid would draw.
Yeah.
But that's intentional, right? I mean, this is not a fault of Terry Moore. He intends, I'm assuming, to juxtapose the more realistic illustrations with that which is a little more iconic, abstract, or cartoony for a particular effect. And he does that also in terms of character expressions, because you'll see individuals, sometimes major players, sometimes just characters that are in and out, and that's all you see of them, something on one page, where they will have a more realistic expression, and then they'll be surprised by something or shocked or desirous of something, and they'll have cartoony features. This is something that you find going on all the time with, let's say, Jaime Hernandez. So I think something similar is going on with Terry Moore's work.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, I think that's a hallmark of Moore, and brilliant that you point that out. That, you know, it starts at the level of a facial expression. I'm looking at two panels, for instance, where Sam is, you know, sort of like pretty realistically, you know, shocked at something Mike says, and then the next one she's gazing up at the sky, and there's a sense of wonder on her face that looks wonderfully cartoony. But I think that that juxtaposition, you know, Terry Moore is a fantastic cartoonist. And there's this way he seems to always be looking for chances to show off his cartooning chops. Like in Strangers in Paradise, there would be the juxtaposition of different expressions, one more extreme and the other more realistic. But also, you know, there's these the Strangers in Paradise kids, when it'd be like really just flat out like, you know, comic strip cartooning, you know?
Yeah.
And other ways that I just feel like he is able to utilize, I think that's like the gift of comics, and he's able to utilize that and bring them together. It's also the gift of comics to take like things that are more real, like, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder, wearing down a person who is dealing with loneliness and isolation, and funny animals, you know? And I think Moore has said in interviews that there was a kind of a Calvin and Hobbes inspiration to his initial sketches of Sam and Mike, and I think that's kind of brilliant. It's it's awesome when that gets put together effectively and becomes an affecting story and a sort of, makes you think about reality, makes you think about how these sort of imaginative worlds live with our reality.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned PTSD. This is a story that in the initial issues starts, or chapters if you're reading the collected, begins much more lightheartedly than it ends up.
Yes.
As the story progresses, it becomes, I guess you could say, more serious, quite a bit more heavy, in that we do see much more detail about the life of Sam, what's going on with her, and not just physiological, right? I mean, there, as you pointed out, the psychological issues involved, especially as the story progresses and we see Libby, who, by her own admission, is a mother figure for Sam, and who seems to be more and more concerned with her as the story unfolds.
Yeah. It's a gut punch. I think that, I was talking about the compactness, what story Moore is able to tell, like you said, sprinkled throughout, and especially heavy doses at the beginning, with a lot of like humor and fancy, especially with Larry and Victor, who do make me laugh out loud. But it gets heavy, and I think it's very moving at the end. And I thought that was really well done.
Yeah. Something that you said a moment ago, that, now that we have Motor Girl finished, that may be, I guess we could call it a gateway drug for Terry Moore. If you're trying to get people interested in his work, you're right. I think this is a good mini-series or limited series to begin with. I would also put in that category, just because of, I guess, its length. It's relatively short. It's Echo, which was his second ongoing title. Echo, longer than Motor Girl, but not near as long as Rachel Risingand, and especially not as long as Strangers in Paradise.
Right.
But that's another one I think that people could try out and see if Terry Moore is for them. It's a very different kind of story from Motor Girl, but it is a little more containable. Rachel Rising is outstanding. It's fabulous. But as you pointed out, it is a longer narrative.
Yeah. 40 some issues, I think, and Echo for 30. So Rachel Rising does stretch a little bit more. Yeah. And I guess the last thing to say, and maybe this is by way of segue to Strangers in Paradise, is I'm in these different worlds that Terry Moore has been creating in each of these respective titles, and they're sort of like genre switches, right? Like I said, Strangers in Paradise does the relationship and romance and life and friendship, but also some crime stuff, and intrigue. And then, Echo being a sort of like superpowers, sci-fi-ish, narrative, but still very character-centered. And then Rachel Rising being horror, and now Motor Girl being, I don't know, I'm not sure what it is. It's sort of, it's like a lot of like Born on the 4th of July veterans stories.
A semi-war story.
That's right. And that kind of set in the desert landscape, and, but with these like fantastical elements of the gorilla and the UFO and things like that, and the government conspiracy stuff. I just feel like there's this it's interesting that characters from, like, minor background characters from one of the stories have always sort of, peeked into the other ones to some extent. And I think that it's an interesting way that, the difference between this and as crossover, Terry Moore's universe as crossover, and something like Milk Wars, obviously, is this sort of single author, like Milk Wars is speaking to the chaos or anarchy of multiple creators and their overactive imaginations, having their hands in these worlds. Terry Moore has gotten to author all these different, story worlds on his own, and definitely has that auteur thing going on with his work. But it's just interesting because there's such different sort of genre touchstones in each of this series, and so to have the characters cross over is an interesting way to think about existing in a world together. Me and my daily comedy interacting with somebody else and their horror movie of a life. We still live in the same universe and walk in the same streets, and that's kind of fun.
This is a good segue into Terry Moore's most recent work, Strangers in Paradise 25. Because, as you pointed out in Motor Girl and the character Libby, it may kind of hearken to something that he was doing previously with Strangers in Paradise, but it's a very minor, if we want to call it, intrusion, one narrative world into the other.
Right.
And I have to say that until this new series, especially the second issue of it, Strangers in Paradise 25, I really didn't expect these different worlds that Terry Moore had created to intersect so directly. And in fact, even reading this first issue of Strangers in Paradise 25, I really didn't think that we would get the collision that is clearly apparent in issue number 2. Right. So in this way, I'm glad that we waited to discuss Strangers in Paradise 25 after this second issue came out. I think at one point about a month ago, I had asked Gene if he wanted to include a discussion of Strangers in Paradise 25 number 1 on the show. And he said, we can, but he really didn't know anything about Strangers in Paradise. He said, that's just kind of a weak spot with me. I just haven't had the opportunity to read Terry Moore as much as I would like.
Sure.
And so I said, okay, I'll leave it. It's a good thing because now we can talk about it so much more with Strangers in Paradise 25 now that this second issue is out.
Sure. Yeah. Although I would be really curious how a reader like Gene, obviously a hyper perceptive and sharp reader, but without background knowledge of Strangers in Paradise, took to the first issue, because, I'm unable to imagine not knowing Strangers in Paradise when I read this, So how does this read to somebody who doesn't know Katchoo from, issue after issue after issue of her drama with Francine? I wonder about that. I think the first issue particularly is so compelled by action and brings us slightly into sort of a slightly new set of things that I feel like the first issue was written so that, like I was saying earlier about disorientation, actually, whether you are a longtime Strangers reader or not, you could sort of like, oh, something's happening here. I'm intrigued, But you're right. Starting with second issue, all the callbacks to the universe start hitting all those notes. Yeah.
Right. Now, the first issue of Strangers in Paradise 25 came out in January. The second one came out in March. And I guess we'll get the third, in May? Because it's coming out every other month.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's roughly the schedule.
Yeah. Now, I think that Moore has done a fabulous job of introducing the Strangers in Paradise world in ways that would satisfy both readers of Strangers in Paradise, right, who know the previous Strangers in Paradise runs, but at the same time, people who have no clue whatsoever about Strangers in Paradise. So again, coming back to my example of Gene, I think that he could have gotten a lot out of this first issue without really knowing anything about Strangers in Paradise. And Moore does this in those two issues, but in very different ways. I think with issue number 1, the setup of this story that he has underway right now, and I think Strangers in Paradise 25 is going to be, is it 12 issues?
I don't know that it's been specified, but it is going to be short, he said, I think.
For some reason, the number 12 comes to mind, and maybe I'm making that up, but I think I may have heard that somewhere. Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. This is going to be relatively limited. But in this first issue, we do see Katchoo, we do see Francine, and we do see, let's say, Tambi, right? In reference to Darcy Parker and then the Parker girls. But it's handled in such a way that you do not have to have read any issues of the previous Strangers in Paradise.
That's right.
You get what you need for that first issue about Katchoo, Francine, so on and so forth from that first issue. And so I think that that's great. Also, in this second issue, I think that Moore does an even better job of potentially bringing new readers on in two different ways. And I don't want to get in spoiler territory, but we can say, since we've been hinting around at it for a while, that the mashup of Strangers in Paradise and Rachel Rising become very clear in this second issue.
Yes.
And in fact, when I picked up, I was telling you before we turned on the mics today, that when I saw the cover of issue number 2, in the background was a character that looked like Earl from Rachel Rising. I said, is that Earl from Rachel Rising? And is Terry Moore having fun?
Yeah.
Yes, the Rachel Rising world becomes a viable, active part of Strangers in Paradise with issue number 2. However, you could know nothing about Rachel Rising and still get everything you need out of issue number 2 of Strangers in Paradise. Yeah. Another wonderful thing that Terry Moore does is he includes what some may consider kind of an overt kind of exposition, although I don't think it's overt. It's definitely not intrusive, because he basically gives you a lot of backstory about his previous Strangers in Paradise through Katchoo's voiceover that basically brings us where she is when this issue opens, and she's on a cliff in a snowstorm. And you're wondering, how the hell did she get there from issue number 1?
Yes.
But not only does Terry Moore use that voiceover throughout most of issue number 2 to get us caught up with what has happened to Katchoo in this new series, but also to fill us in on who Katchoo was, what was her relationship with Francine, who is Tambi, what are the Parker girls.
Right, 25 years of stuff.
Exactly. And that's the reason why this is called Strangers in Paradise 25, because it's the 25th anniversary of Strangers in Paradise.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. I think that was very canny that the first issue was actually largely wordless, very propelled by action and intrigue, you know? And I think that was a very smart, very canny move for the first issue, because it didn't give you the sense that you have to know a bunch of stuff. You know, you just recognize, oh, someone's on the run and somebody else is in pursuit, you know? Like that very simple setup kind of propels the first issue. But by the second issue, you are looking for a little bit more for some answers. And you're right, that more structurally sets up the narrative, you know, sort of in media res with her in Media Mountain, and in danger, and then goes back. And you're right, there's like a lot of exposition that happens via narrative, summing up not just Strangers in Paradise stuff that you need to know, but also really Rachel Rising stuff that you need to know, you know? So, you know, you can sort of get the Wikipedia download of what exactly happened in all those years of Strangers in Paradise and Rachel Rising. But I think that actually he does it quite effectively here and still makes it, you know, not boring, because it answers the question of why we are where we are with Katchoo at that moment. So yeah, it's just really, it's intriguing. And again, I feel like Moore is masterfully doing like a little bit of a genre shift, you know? There's like, I mean, there were notes of this obviously in Strangers in Paradise, but that intrigue note has just like been jacked way up high. And so it does feel very, like I was saying earlier, propulsive in this telling, which is great, which is really interesting.
Right. If the original Strangers in Paradise, in addition to being what you called it, you know, romance, kind of a real life verite thing going on, it was also crime and thriller. This new one definitely has thriller, but there seems to be more spy than crime, at least so far.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. I hadn't thought about it that way, but a little Jason Bourne-ish.
Yeah. And it has me excited. It also has me wondering how much more of this integration of various worlds of Terry Moore that we're going to see in this. Now, in that first issue, there was that allusion to a collider and that kind of project going on in Alaska, which brings us to Echo.
That's right.
For those who may be unfamiliar. So I'm wondering if we will find more of an Echo presence in this new series. And if maybe we'll see versions of Katchoo and Francine and David as little kids.
Yeah.
Strangers in Paradise kids.
Yeah. And hey, I would be super on board for Motor Girl stuff showing up here too.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I think he's alluded, again, there's an interview on CBR that I read from Terry Moore a while back, but I think he's alluded to this really wanting to be a culmination. You know, 25 years he's put in the work, so to speak, to create these characters and worlds, you know? So it does feel like, on one hand, as we were saying, this is accessible for somebody who doesn't know all that backstory. On the other hand, he wants to pay off like all the faithful, you know, all the Abstract Studios faithful who have been reading and who are enjoying the fact that these characters are, you know, resurfacing and interacting with each other. It's sort of the satisfaction of the crossover.
Yeah. And for those who may not be familiar with Terry Moore, Abstract Studio is basically him and his wife, Robin, and that's it.
Yeah, right. Yep. And they do great stuff. They absolutely do great stuff. I just want to add one more thing about Terry Moore's work, and it actually relates to something that you said earlier, which was that you were talking about his sort of aptitude with anatomy and personality and character and so forth. There's he put out a few how to draw books a few years back, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Early 2010s. Yeah. And I remember reading his book about how to draw women, and this I think speaks to who he is and why I appreciate him so much. And from the cover, and he actually acknowledges in the text, there's pretty girls, who are attractive, voluptuous, or whatever on the cover. And I hope this was his strategy, that he suckered a lot of people to buy it because they wanted to learn how to draw pretty girls like that. But the text inside, he says right off the bat, this book is more about the mindset of cartooning than some sort of anatomy lesson, right? And I get the sense that he's sort of, the reason I think he's kind of ironically attracting people who are interested in cartooning voluptuous, attractive women is because the actual text inside, he does talk about like imagining the body that's underneath the clothing and so forth. But you see in his writing and in his sketches that it's really, he talks about anatomy, and he talks about, even he talks about breasts and so forth, but he does so to as a reflection of the thoughts that an artist has about a character. How does their gait kind of reflect their personality or their mood, or how does their movement capture the spirit, the essence, the personality of the character, right? And so what I love about Terry Moore, and I think is here in these works, is like he draws women and he draws them as humans, and what he's trying to engage us in is recognizing the sort of splendid humanity that is in these women characters. And I think for that, I just really appreciate Terry Moore's doing. Like there's that like surface level, and you can easily dismiss it. He even talks about this experience at being at a con where somebody looks at the pretty girl on the cover and goes, "Oh no," But when you actually get into it, there's just so much depth there that if that's something that's warding readers off of Terry Moore's work, I just want to encourage you to look a little deeper, because I think there's a lot of richness there.
Oh, yeah. And I'm glad that you mentioned that. Now, a little while ago, I made just kind of a brief comparison between the style that we see with Terry Moore and Jaime Hernandez. I want to come back to that because I think that there's a lot of similarity between Jaime's art and Terry Moore's art and what he does. And I'm specifically making a comparison between Moore and Jaime and not Moore and the Hernandez brothers. With Gilbert, it's a whole other game.
I agree.
In terms, especially when it comes to his anatomy and especially his representation of women. But with Jaime, the one thing about his art, he can draw beautiful women. And it's kind of like with Terry Moore. It's easy to see how people can be drawn or even repelled by that art. Either thinking, okay, this is someone who does what I want, and that is objectifying the body in a very sexy way. Or driving potential readers away by saying, this is an artist who objectifies women in women's bodies. I don't want a part of that. Both Jaime and Terry Moore do draw very attractive women, but at the same time, they're very realistic, as you were pointing out. It's what's underneath the clothing. And so just as we get with Jaime different versions of Maggie, we get Maggie when she's thin. We get Maggie when she's not so thin. We get Maggie when she's young, when she's old.
Angry, happy.
Fit, dumpy, all of that. Same thing with Terry Moore's women or all people that he writes, and not just the women. And so we get a wide range of characterization. So again, that's another connection between those two creators. With Terry Moore, he is someone that if you don't know his art and you do see his images of, let's say, Rachel or Katchoo, you think, okay, he just draws sexy women. Well, yeah, but he does a lot more than that.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think the comparisons are more than fair. And there's probably some thinking and maybe critique that has been done or to be done about these being, male creators rendering females. But yet I think, I'm a male reader, so what do I know? But I think there is a certain, this is like a great complexity, and you love these characters, and you get a sense that as creators, they feel these characters to be very alive and to speak to them very much. And I think that's, at least for me, an experience that I appreciate.
Yes. So I'm curious how the story of Strangers in Paradise 25 will unfold. I'm really excited about this.
Me too. I'm going to follow along.
Great titles that we discussed this week. We started off with the 5 issues that make up DC and Young Animal's Milk Wars. After that, Paul, we looked at the Motor Girl Omnibus by Terry Moore, and then looked at the first 2 issues of his Strangers in Paradise 25.
It was fun. Yeah, man, I loved talking about these books with you, Derek. Derek, you have this way of taking the gibberish that comes out of my mouth and turning it into something coherent and interesting. So it's fun talking these books with you, and I truly enjoyed reading them. So this is good.
Well, listen, the alternative would be me just talking by myself on this show, and that would truly be gibberish. It's something I have a fear of, which, I've told you before off mic, you seem to have more of a knack for being a solo podcaster than I have.
Oh, thank you, Derek. You've done a great job with your solo podcasting, for instance, of that one Euro episode.
Well, that was just one episode.
I think it just goes to show what a strange, lonely, insane person I am.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but the conversation was great.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if you like strange, lonely titles, then kind of like Milk Wars, I guess.
That's right.
Then definitely check out the website of our sponsor, which is Discount Comic Book Service. Every single month, you're going to find some incredible specials. April is no different. So go to dcbservice.com. And after you do get your titles there, get in touch with us and let us know what you're going to be reading. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you could leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way by picking up the phone and dialing 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
You can also email us. The podcast is at 2 guys, TWOGUYS at comicsalternative.com. I'm Paul at comicsalternative.com. Derek is Derek at comicsalternative.com. And as you can tell by our enthusiastic response to the mailbag, we love getting feedback and we appreciate your engagement with us. And so please do get in touch with us, however you do, whatever different means that you have to do it. And we'll tell you about some of those means now.
That's right. Yeah, you can do what Heroic Times did just moments ago, and that is send us an email, or you can contact us in a variety of different ways on social media. We have accounts on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, YouTube, Slack, and Discord. You can subscribe to the podcast through Apple Podcasts. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on Spotify, on TuneIn, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, comicsalternative.com.
That's right. And I'll just throw in here that you can also find a link at comicsalternative.com to our Patreon page, where we'd love if you would check it out and come and support the work here.
That's right. Lately, we have been welcoming more podcast patrons, and so we would like to add you to our roll. The noble crowd who has decided to officially support us, and we appreciate that. And as I mentioned last week, we will be making changes. Paul and I together will be making changes to the Comics Alternative Patreon campaign in the weeks to come. So listen up for those changes. We'll be back next week. Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Paul. Take care.